Is there anybody there?
The risk you run when you let a ball
Mhm.
bounce twice is you don't know what it's going to hit and where it's going to go. So there's this chance where you try to play that little gamesmanship and you end up getting nobody out because the ball kicked 20 feet away because it hit a rock or something, right?
What's up, Dad Hat Crew? Ed here, and on this episode, I am taking you guys to school. That's right. We are learning a little bit of history about old-time baseball. That's right. The original rules, how they were done, the kind of baseball that they were using, the bat, whether or not they use a glove, and when did they use a glove? Yep, all of that. I sat down with Corky Gaskel. He's a historian. He's also a awesome dude who makes some baseballs by hand, guys. That's right. We go all into this baseball in this part one, right? Because I had to break it down because there's a lot of information and I just couldn't just delete a lot of stuff. So, but let me tell you guys are going to enjoy it. So without further ado, I'll give you the episode. Well, welcome back to yet another episode of the Dad Hat Chronicles. My name is Ed, and guys, today I am taking you guys to school. That's right. We are going to learn some baseball. That's right, we are. And to do so, obviously, that's not going to be me because I am not well educated when it comes to the history of baseball. So that's why I brought some people over. Today, Corky Gaskel, my friend, you are going to help me understand this beautiful game that we call baseball, where some of the original rules and things like that. And first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I tell you, any chance I get to talk about baseball, it's a good day.
It really is, isn't it? You know, watching baseball, playing baseball, talking baseball. There's nothing wrong. It's a beautiful thing.
Yep.
Obviously the way that I obviously not obviously, but the way that I got in contact with you was through a mutual friend of ours, Andrew Nelson. And I was like, hey, Andrew, I wanted to get to a little bit of a series of, the history of baseball, want to bring in different people. Do you think you can, help me out with it? He goes, absolutely. I can actually give you a name of the person who can actually help you out better than me. And here we are. So thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that, my friend. But let's get started. What got you started with this game of baseball? Like, what was that moment that you said, man, this is a fun game?
Now, are you referring to baseball in general or baseball with the vintage flair that we play?
Let's start with, because you're right. That's a two-part question for you. Let's start
Yeah.
with baseball in general, and then we'll go into vintage baseball.
Yeah. So my start in baseball, I guess technically would have been wiffle ball as a kid
Oh.
growing up. Our neighborhood, we had a narrow but long open lot between a couple houses.
Hmm.
And so the use of real baseball was going to take out too many windows. So we chose wiffle ball, and it was fine because we had a bat, we had a ball, we had four bases, and we played. Um, I was um, I was very short and very fat at that time. I've grown out of that. People look at me and go, "There's no way." And so I wasn't picked a lot to be on teams, other than football. But I loved baseball. I mean, I could throw, I could hit. It was just the running part that made it tough. And so because of that, I never really got involved playing in the little league stuff that we
Hmm.
had going on. But I loved it so much. I showed up, and I would always help the coach of the local community team. And so as a third grader, as a fourth grader, as a fifth grader, I was an assistant coach basically. And
Gotcha.
so I
Okay.
was helping shag balls, I would throw some batting practice, whatever it took to help out with this. And so I was always around the game. I didn't play much. And then in high school, I wasn't, there's no way I had grown out of my short, fat stage. I was an, average looking human being then. But because I didn't play a lot, I was so far behind everybody else. The only thing I could do was throw really hard. But, and I'm not going to compare myself to Nolan Ryan, but when he first came up, he was hitting everybody, right? He was really wild.
Yeah.
I had no control. And
Right.
so I decided to get into fast pitch softball.
Interesting.
Um, and so I could figure that out. I could do the wind up, I could pitch, and I actually got pretty good at it. And so I played some of that. When I got into college, I did intramurals. And then when I came as an adult, got my first job in Minnesota, and then had kids, I decided, I want to get back into coaching. And so that's what I did. I got into coaching. And I did that for about 15 years. And during that time, and this is kind of a segue now into the
Yeah.
vintage baseball. During the summers, we would go and watch this local vintage team play, and we take the whole family, we go and watch. And I'd always tell my wife, when I'm done coaching, this looks like something I think I would enjoy, because it's a mix of playing and a mix of some history. And
Hmm.
I thought that was interesting. And that's what happened. I finished up coaching, contacted the local club, got involved, um, and never really looked back after that. I played. I showed up enough that the lady in charge of the team made me the captain. I got involved in the national organization, the Vintage Baseball Association,
Hmm.
very heavily. Got asked a few years back to be part of the Rules and Customs Committee,
Yeah.
which is a group of people that research all of the newspapers and stories of the day and try to find out
Yeah.
how they really did it, so that we can teach people how the game was played with some form of accuracy. We have documentation that says this is what they did, and so like I say, just every year I got a little more involved, little more involved. I got to the point where, and I'll just hold this up. I started
Oh, look
making
at that. Look at that baseball.
I started making the 19th century baseballs. That took off. Other teams started using them. They liked them. Um, and so it's just every year something new is going on where I'm getting more involved. But I'm kind of on the side going down the hill now, where I'm 62. I don't play as much, mostly because people don't want me to play. you get you get to a certain age, it's like, hey, slow down. Maybe you could do this. And so I got really involved in umpiring since I knew the rules.
Yeah.
People from all over the country were inviting me out to come umpire games, because umpires are hard to find in our
Hmm.
vintage game. So that's kind of the trajectory I'm on now, is spending more time umpiring, spending more time teaching the rules, teaching people how to make the baseballs, and less time actually playing, just for
Yeah.
my own safety too.
That's pretty cool though. Like, I mean, and it's funny, right? Like, I mean, everybody tells you it's like at a certain age, you just stop playing, you stop doing things. But like, there's always some form of involvement in the sport. And for you, you're like you said, you're teaching now, you're doing some umpiring, and you're still teaching people how to make the baseball. Which, by the way, I actually get to feel one of those, and those are super cool baseballs.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I
like, I mean, that's some serious craftsmanship, my friend.
Yeah, and it got me a gig out at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I got to do a presentation through the SABR Group, Society of American Baseball Research, on how they made the baseballs back in the day, and show people all the different, because the ball changed sizes over years
Yeah.
until 1872, and so I would have an example of every year, every type of cover, pretty much anything you could think of. I was making one. Uh,
Yeah.
that was kind of cool.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? Because they're the evolution of the baseball has gone through a lot of changes over the years until we have what we see, today. So the one that you were holding, which has the stitching in a crisscross pattern, right? That one, yeah. That is that like the original one, or or something like that?
It's the most popular they had back in the day.
Okay.
Modern folks, even though it's an anachronism, it's not really. They never called it this. They call it the lemon peel. I don't
Okay.
I don't know why, because in my research I found instances, these articles that talked about how the ball was made as you would cut an orange. So it
Mhm.
should be an orange peel ball.
Right.
And I don't know how lemon peel came about, but it was never called that back in the day. It was called a star pattern or a four petal ball.
Gotcha.
Actually, when it first came out, it was just the baseball, because there
Mhm.
was no other type of ball made until they came out, with this what we call a figure eight,
Yeah.
but they called a continuous seam. It was one continuous seam that didn't have break points like this thing right here at the tip.
Right, right at the tip. There's some. That's
So
exactly.
yeah, this was the most common 1840s and 50s through kind of to the end of the 1860s, and then the continuous seam or figure eight ball kind of started to get some momentum, and eventually over time kind of took over uh, what they used in the games. But the lemon peel, modern term lemon peel, stuck around even through the 70s and 80s to some degree because they are a lot easier to make.
That's pretty cool though. Like I mean, I actually like the the design of it just because it's different, right? Like you said, the figure eight, everybody knows what it is. It's in softball as well, so everybody knows the traditional now, that what we call traditional now. But like to actually see what players use. Let me ask you, as far as what materials did they use to create that baseball? What was used?
So prior to 1857,
Mm-hmm.
when we finally got in the rule book, the rules would actually specify India rubber as the center, wrapped in yarn, covered with leather. That was really how they listed it from a material standpoint.
Okay.
But we've found articles, newspaper articles, when someone needed a ball, they could have cut up an old pair of galoshes and use that for the rubber.
Mm-hmm.
And they could have covered it with like an old pillowcase or something, whatever they could find just to go out and play the game. But when you got into match play, and I'll back up a second, there was even an instance for teams that lived near the Great Lakes where they would catch a sturgeon fish, pull the eyeball out of it, and use that instead of rubber because it was the right consistency, the right size, the right weight. It just one of those things I have yet to do. I really hope to someday find a sturgeon fish and pull the eyeball out of it and make it. But again, this is just people coming up with ways. I need a ball to go play this game. But when you get in, follow the rule book, start getting into match play, more, I don't want to call it league play because they didn't have that
Yeah.
yet in our era, but it was India rubber, which comes out of a tree like we would get sap for maple syrup. They drill a
Yeah.
hole in the tree, it would come out, they'd make a caoutchouc, which is a big chunk of rubber, cut it into strips, wrap it with yarn, and they use mostly woolen yarn, but there's references to cotton yarn as well. And then just wrap it with leather, which they started out with sheepskin. Those were coming apart quite easily, and I've made some with sheepskin that's too thin to
Mm-hmm.
really hold up. And eventually they got into horsehide, which was a much tougher material, and the balls started to last a little longer. But we have
Gotcha.
we have documentation as to how they did it, and we know what they did, and that's what I try to follow. Outside of not having a rubber tree, but I try to follow. So I just
that
use rubber bands myself.
that's that's pretty awesome. The fact that you actually still to this day are still making them. I just saw a tweet that you were on, that you were saying that have 30 something balls already ready to go. And this was back in February for for your replica 1860s baseballs, you know.
Yeah, I've made almost 200 so far this year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, once word got out that there are teams that really like to portray history.
Yeah.
And so when they get into these matches with two teams that are really into the history, they want a handmade baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other people that make them. I've taught dozens of people. But some clubs are like, I don't have anybody that wants to make them. Send me a dozen, send me 2 dozen, whatever. And as long as they give me notice, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other clubs that aren't as into the history. They just go buy them, from the companies that get them from China. They
Mm-hmm.
don't care. They have the look of a lemon peel ball. Um, and they'll probably last a little longer. They might get a better discount on quantity, whatever. Um, but my focus really, thankfully, is those teams that want to portray history a little bit more and have that handmade baseball like they would have used in that day.
Gotcha. Honestly, that's pretty cool. I'd rather have a handmade one, right? That's like, that keeping with the historical facts of it. I think that speaks volume to that team who is willing to, follow those guidelines and rules on and on. So mad kudos to those teams that are doing so. Okay, so eventually we're gonna come back to the sturgeon fish thing because that's just wild to me.
It is. It is. I agree. It blew my mind when I read it.
So so let's talk a little bit about a little bit of the history. Like, obviously, and from what I understand, no gloves are used when you guys are playing to keep in line with that time period game, correct?
Correct. So 1850s through the early 1880s, pretty much no gloves.
Hmm.
There were occasions when you'd see a guy with a glove with like the fingers, like a work glove with the fingers cut out.
Hmm.
And that was usually because, he injured his hand the game before, but he still wanted to be able to play.
Hmm.
So it wasn't helping you catch the ball. It was more protecting your hand a little bit in
Gotcha.
that case. So you might see that. Um, but yeah, 1880s, you started to see gloves, but they were basically five fingers, no webbing in between the thumb and the index finger. So again, it was really a hand protection more than anything. And some of the players actually, after wearing them, just threw them out and said it's easier to catch it with your bare hands because those
Yeah.
gloves, if you just picture them being hard leather, a ball hits it, just bounces right away, bounces away. And so you got to have that second hand anyway.
Hmm.
So there was a mix of barehanded and some form of a glove. But the modern glove that we recognize with the webbing and everything is really a 20th century thing. We're talking 1920s, 1930s before you come across that. So
Yeah. Wow.
um, I don't know why it took them so long to figure this out, but that's,
All the injuries that could have been avoided in that
oh
time
yeah,
period.
yeah.
That's okay. So let's talk a little bit about those rules then, because obviously there is a lot of things that are very different in the game that you play, and you umpire compared to today's game. In your opinion, which ones are some of the ones that are noticeably totally different than the game that we see today?
Okay, so I'll focus first on 1858 through about 1864 in that era.
Okay.
Um, a ball a ball that's caught on one bounce
Hmm.
is an out. So if
Okay.
you hit a ball, 350 feet, the outfielder lets it bounce once and he catches it, you're out.
Okay.
Same as if he caught it in the air. If you hit a ground ball to short or second, we're trained in our modern game, run as fast as you can, run through that base, beat that throw.
Yeah.
In our game, if you run past first base, they can tag you out, just like any other base. So that's tricky because, especially for older folks, to get up speed and then start to slow
Having
down
to the
enough
sudden stuff.
to be able to stop on that base. Now, obviously, if you hit one in the gap, you round the base and you can go and you can come back. But as soon as you go past that base, you're at risk to be tagged out. So that's a little different.
Okay, so you don't go straight like how we do now. Like we go straight and then you touch base, first base, you go straight. You're still considered safe.
Yep.
But you can't do this in this game. Like you literally have to stop at first base or run the risk of being tagged out.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Once you go past the base, you got two choices. Try and sneak your way back to the base, or just take off for the next base and hope for the best. Right. You got to do that before they tag you, of course. But
Okay.
yeah, that's the idea. Is you're kind of in this land. Uh-oh. And I tell people this, my very first at bat in the vintage game, and I had zero training when I took the field for the first time
Uh-huh.
because of the timing of everything. I had just got done coaching, and what do I teach these kids? Run through the base. I ran through the base. I beat the throw, and I was so excited. And then I got tagged out, and I forgot all about it. I'm just like, oh yeah.
Oh, my bad, guys. Sorry.
And they all laughed. They all laughed at me. And that's what's nice about most of the vintage, teams, is that
Yeah.
you made a fool of yourself. They'll laugh with you, right? They'll laugh at you. They'll laugh with you because
Yeah.
they've all done it, right? I'm not like the first person to have ever done it. And
Right.
they're all
This is
like,
like this
I
is your
remember when I did that once, So
it's
I'm
part of
one.
like It's part of the initiation of
Exactly.
part coming into the game.
Exactly. I've got guys that have been playing for 15 years that every once in a while they get off that base and then they're just like,
Ugh.
because a lot of them will play softball or they're playing something else where they just got to turn on that 1860 brain and for that game. And
Yeah,
that's hard to do. It is. It's hard to do.
that's awesome. That's amazing. I love that. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the coolest things I've heard so far.
Yeah. The pitching is underhand. You can
Okay.
pitch it. You can pitch it like you'd see in a softball game.
Okay.
And that's how it kind of started when the teams were more social clubs, just playing for exercise.
Yeah.
But in the mid 1850s, the game started to turn somewhat competitive. Pitchers were looking for a way to get an edge, and then you saw them pitch a little bit faster. They put a
Yep.
little more speed on the ball. You couldn't wind up like fast pitch. It's bring your arm straight back and whip it as fast as you can.
Hmm.
And so you saw teams starting to do that. Either way is fine.
Hmm.
I like to tell people try and do a mix. Don't just continually softball pitch.
Hmm.
But what we find is there's some teams that's all they can do.
Hmm.
If they try to throw it fast, it goes all over the place. And
Hmm.
so there's this fine line of keeps the game moving
Yeah.
and still trying to show some of the historical aspects of the game.
Right. Right.
In eight Starting in 1858, the umpires could call strikes on a batter, but only after a warning, and the batter would have to be purposefully letting pitches go by, good pitches go by, like to try and let a runner on base steal a base,
Yeah.
and then the umpire could say, "Hey, that's after two of those. I'm warning you. The next one's going to be called strike if they throw a good pitch." But they
Gotcha.
had to be warned first.
Huh.
They couldn't warn the pitchers. They didn't start doing that until 1864. And so
Okay.
what had happened from 58 to 64, in order to try and catch the runners stealing, the pitchers are doing pitch outs, if you will, what we call a pitch out.
Right.
They called it back then pitching to the catcher, where the catcher would set up outside
Yeah.
and hope that the runner would try and go, and it was easier to throw him out. Well, there was no penalty. You could do that 5 times in a row. There's no balls called. It's
Right.
just making the game last longer. So in 64, they allowed calling of balls. And then in 64, it was three balls or three strikes.
Mm.
For 3 balls, you would get your base. 3 strikes, you're out, as
You're
long
out.
as the catcher caught the third strike cleanly. So, and then in 65, they got rid of the bound rule. The ball had to be caught on the fly in fair territory for the out, but they would allow a bound rule for foul balls. They were trying to discourage foul balls. Foul balls sometimes ended up somewhere, and you had to go look for a ball, kind of thing.
Game
And they didn't.
stoppage and stuff like that.
Right?
Yeah.
They didn't come with 45 dozen baseballs to a game. You had one baseball for the most part. Even if the ball started to fall apart until it was like unplayable, you just kept going. And but the foul balls on the bound, that lasted, I think, till the 1890s. So it lasted a long time.
Oh wow.
The foul ball on the bound out. Uh, what else?
Interesting. So let me ask you that, because obviously you're up to already into the 1890s, and from what I understand is it's 3 balls still and 3 strikes. Where in from your research and everything, where did the fourth ball come into play?
Yeah, so they experimented quite a bit over the years. They actually, in one year, I don't remember which it was 9 balls and 3 strikes.
Holy
Um,
moly.
but there was six. It kind of, they experimented for a long time. In 18, boy, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. In 1887 or 88, they went to uh, 4 strikes. The only year that wasn't three, they said, let's try 4 strikes. I think it was five
What?
balls and 4 strikes. And then the following year, either 88 or 89, it went to 4 balls and 3 strikes, and it stayed that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So over the first 30 years of the 20 to 30 years of the game, they were trying all sorts of things. They even initiated terminology of of a wide or a unfair pitch, or so there's all these different terminologies where if it's only 3 or 4 inches off the plate, it's fair, but it's not a strike and it's not a ball. But if it, so there was
There
not
really
every
was a
pitch
lot
was
of
a ball or a strike.
experimentation.
Right? So some pitches were not a ball or a strike, and it would just be close enough, but not right where it needed to be. If it didn't hit the ground in front of you, if it wasn't over your head, if it wasn't behind you, kind of stuff, they tended to not call a ball. They would just say that's a no call, if you will.
Yeah.
So it was really hard for umpires in that era. Matter of fact, they initiated 1858 calling strikes, 1864 calling balls, but it wasn't until 67, 68 where the umpires actually did it consistently. There were
Oh,
more umpires doing nothing than there were umpires calling balls and strikes when they were asked to by the rules, because it was just like, wow, every umpire could be different. Why would we do this?
yeah.
They sort of rebelled against the
There
uh,
was no uniformity when it came to the actual rules of what a ball or strike was considered.
yeah, because there was really no definition of a zone per se.
Yeah.
Rules just stated for the striker and as close to over the center of the plate. So there you go.
Go ahead.
Have
Try
fun.
to, yeah. Good luck to you.
Yeah, go get him.
Don't hit it down the middle because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah, that
interesting.
that was from an umpire standpoint, I have a method, but what I do before each game, I get the captains together and say, here's what I'm doing. All right. Here's what I'm doing. So everybody knows
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen. And there's not this hesitation of what's he going to say here? What's he going to say there? I try to be as consistent as I can with what I told those guys I'm going to do.
Hmm.
And then the game goes pretty smooth after that.
That's pretty cool, man. I like that. And the fact that, we were just talking about the fact that you are maintaining that history, right? Because also your organization, you're from the team that you're part of, right? I believe is the Roosters, correct?
Correct.
You are also a part of a group that teaches the game and it's a historical game while it's playing the game and then teaching the history at the same time, correct?
Correct. Well, I teach it to those that want it. Some people tell me some people tell me to my face, go to hell. I don't care. That's not what they're there for.
Right.
And I have to learn who wants to learn, who's just there to play and have fun. And they're all kinds of people, all different teams, all over the country.
Hmm.
And I've kind of got it figured out now as to who wants help, who doesn't. And
Yeah.
I try to focus my energy on those that really want to get a more accurate game being played.
Ah, I know I would love to do that. Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? That's just I just looked. There's really no team here in North Carolina that's really doing any of that right now. So I gotta keep looking, because I'm gonna find one for sure.
They
Uh
uh, they have an occasional game in North Carolina, but I think the closest to you is probably Wytheville, Virginia.
oh wow.
I don't know how far that is from
Okay.
you.
I will look. I'm in the Raleigh Durham area, so I will
Okay.
keep looking. Okay. So what are all the rules that are different than how about the home run ball, right? Because there's really, early on there was really no definition for what a home run was.
Yeah, well, there generally weren't fences,
Yeah.
right? It was the first time they brought fences into play. It wasn't to distinguish a home run. It was to keep people out until they paid to come in. It was a way to collect a fee. And so there's instances um, into the 1880s where a ball over the fence might be a ground rule double because that fence is 250 feet away. I'm just using that number as an example.
Yeah.
If the fence was 275, you would get a triple. If the fence was 300, you'd get a home run. So it
Oh,
depended on the distance of the fence. And again, I can't remember the actual distances, but it was
yeah.
to that effect. Before that, when there were no fences, you had two types of home runs. You had a home run and you had a clean home run. So what is the first one? The home run. Think of T-ball. A guy hits a grounder to the
Yeah.
pitcher who overthrows first base, who overthrows second base, who overthrows third base, who can't get it home, and the guy scores, right?
Yeah.
That's a home run.
Ah, okay.
Now, the next kind is you hit the ball over everyone's head and you score before the ball gets back in. There's no errors or no muffs on the play. That's a clean home run. That's how
Hmm.
they distinguished back in the day. So, yeah, there was no automatic. That's a home run. It was hit the ball and run, no matter
See,
what.
yeah, and good luck.
Yeah, hit
Yeah,
the ball and run.
you better get to home if you want to make it a home run.
Right, right.
All right. Okay. All right. So what other rules that are as far as you're concerned that are totally different than today? Obviously,
Yeah.
we've already
So
talked about it. There's no gloves, right? We don't you guys are not using any gloves. The ball is totally different. What about the bat? Is the bat different than what it is now?
in a way, yes. And so bats today tend to have thinner handles and a formation of like a barrel, what we would call a barrel.
Yeah.
The bats in our era generally from the barrel to the knob is kind of a straight taper. It's not constant 2.5 inches all the way, but it's straight with its taper. There's no formation of a barrel.
Okay.
The only restriction on the bat up until 1868 was the barrel was 2.5 inches. It didn't matter how long it was. As a
Okay.
matter of fact, and when I tell you this, you'll understand it. In 1868, they said, we got to limit the length of these bats. These guys are bringing big bats up. And so they made a limit, and I'll just let you guess what was the limit in inches.
What was it? I will get it totally wrong. So I'm not even
No, it's
gonna.
fine. I'm just curious what you would think.
So 24.
Well, a modern bat today is probably 33 to 34 inches.
Oh, okay. So a little bit bigger than that. Yeah.
Yeah, so they limited it to 42.
Oh,
So
good
what does that
number.
tell you they were using before?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
These
So,
things were massive.
oh yeah, and they were referred to sometimes as tree branches and hunks of lumber. I mean, they didn't understand bat speed, right? Exit velocity. Those things weren't around, right?
No, they didn't exist. Any of that. The stuff, the
It,
statistic that we
yeah,
have today.
it was give me the biggest thing you can find, and I'm going to swap that ball with it. And so it's most clubs that play today are using 33, 34-inch bats, right? They it's difficult. And I'm not going to say everybody because I have a good friend of mine who will bring a 48-inch bat to the game and he'll swing it and he'll do just fine with it. Matter of fact, he has for fun a 65-inch bat that he has swung. Um, but as long as the barrel was 2.5 or less, it was all legitimate at that time.
My concern with that is, and I'm sure it happened a lot, is that what happened with the catcher, who was sitting behind,
Yeah,
trying to catch this thing. It was like, you got to be careful not to get, into concussion or get knocked out because you're trying to catch a ball.
yeah. Now one thing, and that's a good point because the catchers in this game did not have to. They didn't squat right behind the plate.
Yeah.
You would stand 30 feet back.
Oh, you better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no matter who's batting,
Okay.
because what you're trying to do now is if they hit a foul tip backwards and you catch it in the air or on the bounce, they're out.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And
That
so,
one bounce rule comes
yeah.
into
So if
play.
you're right next to the batter, it hits you in the face before you can catch it.
Hmm.
So the catchers would kind of crouch. They wouldn't squat down. They just kind of hands on knees kind of
Yeah.
position ready, and they'd be back. And so you see a guy with the 65-inch bat, you're already back pretty far anyway, right? The only time you would move up if they got a runner on base and now you want to try and throw them out, you can't be 30
Oh,
feet back.
okay.
Now
I
you got
know
to
that.
move up. And when that guy comes to the plate with that big bat, you're like, oh,
Yep. Going back.
I'm going back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So,
I want to keep playing a little bit longer.
yeah. But one of the other rules that's really fun, to me, a ball is determined fair or foul based on where it hits the ground first. So the example I use is I'm batting and I hit it and it lands right in front of home plate with some spin and it spins back past the catcher.
Yeah.
It landed in fair territory first, so that's a fair ball,
Wait,
right?
what?
So if I swing
Yeah.
and you don't want to do it on purpose because it wasn't a tactic yet, you swing and you just happen to hit it so it lands right by the third base foul line area and kicks into the what we would call the dugout area.
Yeah.
Take off running because it hit the ground in
In
fair
fair
territory
territory.
first. So there wasn't this rule where it had to go past third base or first base in fair territory. Where did it hit the ground first? And that's how you determine. And the easiest way to understand it or know what to do is the umpire will only call foul balls. If he says nothing,
It's a
that's
fair
him
ball.
saying fair ball.
Gotcha.
So if you hear nothing, you just take off running. It doesn't matter what you think. It could be 6 inches foul as you saw it. He didn't say it.
Yeah.
You run. You just take off running. And if you hear it, then you know, stop.
Gotcha.
So those
Interesting.
that always gets people sometimes too, because they hit it and think, oh, that's a foul ball. Next thing you know, they're out at first base and they're like, what?
Like, hold on a second. It's a foul ball. What are you talking
Yeah.
about? Is it?
So yeah, that's another thing for the umpires to really have their eyeballs. Where did that ball land? Right? You got to be able to see that it landed fair, and then after that, it doesn't matter what happens.
So, and like you were saying, you alluded to this a little bit, but like there, I'm sure some gamesmanship came into play, or try to hit that ball doors, like you said, like the third base to try to get it to dugout, so that way, creates a little bit more confusion at that point and gives you more of an opportunity to go to first base at that point.
Yeah, and so it was the very late 1860s, and some will say even the early 70s. I think the gentleman's name was Dickie Pierce, who perfected it. He could swing his bat down, hit that ball into the ground right in front of home plate, and it would kick off into the, past third base. And he'd have an easy double
Yeah.
because the guy has to go chase it down. And so the issue we have is teams that play in the early 60s are now think that's cool and trying to do it, but they didn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. It happened naturally, and then this Dickie Pierce guy said, I bet I can make that happen unnaturally. I can just do it.
I'm gonna keep practicing. I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, and the story, I call it the story because I don't know if it's really really true, but he led the league in batting average for many years by doing that. And when they outlawed it, he didn't.
Yeah.
Because that was all he knew how to get on.
Yeah,
But
that was his game right there.
yeah,
Like, then you take the game away. Now you're not a good hitter anymore. Well,
yeah.
considered a good hitter anymore.
So that was one of my research check marks I got to do is that really true? But it's one of those things that it's fun to tell the story because you hope it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's like up, in lore or anything like that, that's pretty cool. Just to think, I was like, this is something that, compared to what we think about gamesmanship today's game and everything, right? I was like, when a pitcher is tipping the pitches in and you see the dugout trying to, tell the batter and all that. But now this is just like literally one of the early versions of the game. And she was like, I'm going to make sure that since this is considered a fair ball, I'm going to try to hit it in there and then off I go.
Yeah, and there's other instances of gamesmanship, and I think that's probably the right word. Is that there was no infield fly rule. That didn't come about until the 1890s, and it was really a poorly written one then when they did. But so if there's runners on first and second, and there's a pop fly to a shortstop,
Yeah.
he can choose to let it bounce twice, and then try to turn a double or triple play off of that.
Right.
Because nobody's automatically out. So as a runner, you got to watch him and say, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? The risk you run when you let a ball bounce twice is you don't know what it's going to hit and where it's going to go. So there's this chance where you try to play that little gamesmanship and you end up getting nobody out because the ball kicked 20 feet away because it hit a rock or something, right?
Yeah.
But there's some of that goes on. How do I, since there's no rule against it, how do I use that to my advantage? And you'll see people try and do that, and some know how to surround it, but you got to let it bounce twice before 1864 or before 1865, because once you catch a ball on the bounce, the runners now are no longer obligated to try and go to the next base. They can go back.
Yeah, because you already caught the out.
Yeah, you already got the out. And so you got to let it bounce twice in order to pull it off. Once you get to 1865, it's only got to bounce once, and then it's easier to pull off because now you get it on the bounce and you just get it to the bases you need to.
Yeah.
Get the outs.
Huh. That's interesting. Eh,
Yeah.
I like I like the gamesmanship of it, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you're because there's ways that you could just try to get over another team with you to win.
Oh yeah, and there's more of them. The one instance where I saw the other team absolutely come unglued, but it was because they didn't know.
Yeah,
Right? They didn't know this rule, so the bases were loaded and nobody was out, and the batter was known to be a weaker batter, and
yeah,
there was a really good chance he was going to strike out. Well, the
okay,
catcher knew this. So when the third strike, swinging strike happened, he let the ball bounce twice because if he catches it on one bounce, the batter is out. He let it
yeah.
bounce twice, stepped on home plate, threw it to third, who threw it to second, triple play, inning over. And so by letting it bounce twice, it forced the batter to run, even though the bases were loaded. On a missed third strike by the catcher, you have to run no matter what. And since the bases were loaded, everybody had to run.
Oh my God.
So it was just one of those, and they're all standing on their bases like, what the hell just happened? And when the
How do we go
umpires,
from no outs to triple A in just one
yeah,
play?
so the umpires explained it, and they came unglued. I wasn't the umpire that game, but yeah, and it was just, hang on, this is a rule. This is how. Well, no one told us. Read the rule
The
book.
rule book. There's a
This is
reason
why
you
we're
got a
here.
rule book.
This is education now. And so my only thought was, now that team's, we got to pull that off now. We're going to do that to somebody.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They were
We're going
like,
to get
okay,
even.
just wait until it's our turn to pull this off.
Yeah. And so yeah, there's things like that where, for the most part, if everybody knows what's going on, is you just kind of go, oh crap, they
Right.
they got us good, right? You take it in stride,
Yeah.
but there's still people that have a little bit too much competitive spirit that get angry,
Hmm.
and that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to show with, through education and whatnot. Sometimes you're gonna get one that you don't like, and you just got to smile and say, yeah, they got us, and move on. But
Yeah. They got us on this one. We'll get them next time.
yeah.
That's cool though. Like, I mean, I would love to see something like that in person, just because, right, we're so used to the new version of baseball, what we are seeing every day on TV and at the ballpark, that to see something different, historical, right, like the origins of baseball, it has a little bit of a different meaning to it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I hope you guys enjoy that episode with Corky. Well, actually, part one, because part two is coming next week. So make sure you guys are tuning in for that final episode that we're going to continue on the history and obviously my famous, not so famous questions. So in the meantime, between now and when the second episode releases, my man sells the baseballs. I bought two already, guys. I have two of them that are going into the office and display. So I'm pretty excited about that. He will send you a kit if you want to build it yourself, so absolutely take advantage of that. Make sure you guys are following. He's on Twitter, Facebook. Make sure you guys are following him because he puts some cool stuff out there. And then obviously I'll let you know that I am going to try to build one. I cannot guarantee that it's going to come out, but we'll see how that goes. And then make sure you guys are following the podcast. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, even on TikTok as well, guys. So until then, keep on grinding and always support the minor leagues. See ya.